My name is Brad Larschan, and I'm the CEO of Avadain, a graphene technology company that has the potential to transform thousands of products. So far, we've attracted just over $10 million in funding.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in and welcome to the Fundraising Debrief, the podcast where we share the real stories behind successful founders and the recent VC financing rounds. My name is Vlad Cazacu and I'll be your host today as we interview Brad Larschan and follow his journey from attorney to research commercialization expert and now the founder and CEO of a cutting-edge graphene startup. This is a rather unique episode where we dive deep into alternative ways of starting a company, how to navigate the XCF capital raise, and learn from his successes. For more information about running a self-fundraising round, including show notes, highlight clips, and exclusive scenes, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at The Fundraising Debrief, as well as on our website at thefundraisingdebrief.com. This episode is brought to you by Flowlie, the all-in-one fundraising hub used by thousands of founders from 65 countries to plan their rounds, share their deck, and track access. Now, let's dive right in. Brad, such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Well, the pleasure is all mine, Vlad. I really look forward to this.
I'm really excited to dive a little bit deeper into your background, what you're doing at Avadain, and also discuss the different financing structures that you chose for your business, because we haven't had the chance to explore this on the podcast yet around equity crowdfunding and the likes. But before we even get there, I would like to start with a little bit more about you and getting the listeners some understanding of who Brad really is. Specifically, you've started your journey and you're a lawyer by trade, and your career took you through different industries, and at some point led you to lead a graphene technology company. So help us fill in the gap between law student graduate and graphene technology company CEO.
Yes, well, I often wonder how I got from here to there myself, but I'll give you my background in a nutshell. My academic training is as an international lawyer, and I had the great good fortune of working for a Wall Street law firm in their Washington, D.C. office, practicing a wide variety of law, but mostly oriented to international law. And I worked for an amazing partner, but when he retired, I thought, there's more in life than just practicing law. It's a fantastic profession. We had great work, but I really wanted to do things myself where I could make a difference. And so when my boss retired, I thought, well, I'm just going to go off to start my first company, and moved to London and did in fact start my first company there, which was a British hard goods company back in the 90s. And we grew that, were able to sell that. Then I got into, with the proceeds, investing in .com companies, which went well until about the year 2000. And I think everyone knows what happened then. And after that, I thought, well, the .com movement was really right. Technology was going to become very critical to our future. And so I started working with a fellow on trucking company logistics and how technology could improve trucking company efficiency in the bottom line. And that led us to creating new products. But when we actually wound up buying a patent portfolio, it turned out that patent portfolio, which we thought was standing in the way of our product development, related to the U.S. cellular network design. And so we thought that's more important than this trucking industry innovation. So we began licensing technology in the mid-2000s, and that went very successfully. Our patent law firm, Fish & Richardson, decided they wanted to form with us a company to do the same thing and represent universities and research institutions all over the world. And so we then wound up working with a group in Germany called the Fraunhofer Institute. We helped them to commercialize, that is, to sell a patent portfolio that they had developed related to video compression. They called it H.265. Today we call it MPEG-5. We sold that for $157 million. And the reason I mention that is not because I want you to tell me how great that was, but rather because in 2016, that institute, Fraunhofer, came back to us with the idea for how to make the type of graphene that no one else could and that more industries needed. And so that's how I became involved in graphene.
That's quite a fantastic journey. And I'm curious to understand, as you accepted the offer to start again, pretty much another entrepreneurial adventure, what was going on through your mind? You've definitely had your fair share of success in a number of companies. What prompted you to get back into it now one more time and do it all over again?
Well, the licensing company we had was great, but again, I had the same desire to do something more, to be fulfilled personally by being in right from the very beginning. And so in 2016, although we continued our other company for several years after that, we really began focusing on building up the graphene industry and this particular graphene technology. Our co-investor in this is Panasonic Corporation, and they're just absolutely great to work with. And so when Fraunhofer finished their project, Panasonic and I decided that to make this to achieve the potential that we all saw, to make this really change the world, we really needed to just start a company and devote that company to upscaling this technology to mass production and then commercializing it broadly so that, thousands of companies would have access to this material, graphene.
And walk us a little bit through that Fraunhofer meeting that you had in which you discovered this technology and almost decided on the spot that this is something that's going to revolutionize the world. How that experience felt.
Well, because of our experience in 2013 with Fraunhofer, I had a high degree of confidence in their scientific and engineering capability. And so when they explained in 2016 that two of their very young researchers had this idea on how to overcome the obstacles that really no one else had been able to overcome at that time to make this very high quality graphene, it was a leap of faith. It really was like a lottery ticket, right? And so we wrote a check for that, and we just trusted that they would be able to do it. And of course, we monitored that. We felt very well kept informed during the process. But we increased in confidence as we went forward because they were identifying problems and then overcoming those problems, which allowed us to file patent applications, and those turned into patents, which we then patented globally. And so we really built it up from the idea stage to the point where in a batch process, meaning on, off, meaning make it, then take it out, that Fraunhofer could reliably manufacture this super material graphene. And then they finished that project in 2020, handed the technology over to Panasonic and to us. And then, as I said before, we together formed Avadain to take it to the point that we could make, instead of grams or milligrams, we can make tons and tons of graphene.
So the original capital for this was from the licensing business, and at some point you had to partner with Panasonic and raise more capital to start Avadain. Walk us through that very first funding decision and saying, "Hey, this is something real. We have the technology. Now we need to get the people, the manufacturing in place, and the funding to transform this into a real company and commercialize it."
Right. It was iterative, right? So when we first got involved and financially committed to it, it really was like a lottery ticket. You know, if you win, you'll win big. If you lose, well, at least you'll have fun in the meantime. Then the next year, we brought Panasonic in because we had actually worked with them on several other technologies. And they decided that it was the potential was worthwhile for them. The cost versus the potential made a lot of sense. And so they wrote a bigger check. And when Fraunhofer finished its work, then the whole funding strategy had to come into play because at that point we formed Avadain. Until then, it was just a research project that we were independently funding. We formed Avadain in 2020. And then the process was, how do we build the company? Of course, we looked at venture capital. We spoke to venture capital firms. They had a radically different view of what the value of the company was compared to what we had. And so then we went through the traditional route. We went to angel investors to begin with. We raised about $200,000 because First, because we live in the middle of the country in Memphis, Tennessee, there really aren't venture capital firms in this part of the country. So we had to go elsewhere for it. And as I said a moment ago, the terms that we were being offered didn't meet our expectations or anything that we believed would be fair. And so as we looked at alternative funding mechanisms, when we did our trade-off analysis, we decided that we would take a chance on crowdfunding. Because with crowdfunding, the key is to convince a large number of people that you have a good idea, a very solid business plan, a very experienced management team, and that they should risk their hard-earned money in you. And so our first crowdfunding campaign was in 2022 and raised $1.36 million. So we thought that was very successful. It exceeded our expectations. After that, we waited until January. In January, we did an angel round. We had two groups of angels that invested. The Keiretsu Forum from Singapore liked us and invested $200,000. And then the biggest group of investors outside of Panasonic has been the Harvard Business School alumni angels. In January, they invested $405,000. In February, we kicked off our second crowdfunding campaign.
I'm curious to understand, this is not necessarily the traditional way startups get funded, but also not necessarily the traditional way startups get created in the first place by having access and acquiring this type of technology. What was the original, outside of the valuation or lack of congruency with venture capital firms as you were just getting this started?
Part of the problem, and it's a fair point, it's a fair problem to have, is that venture capital firms didn't really understand what graphene was. Most people think of graphene as being a singular material, right? You have graphene or you don't. But actually, graphene is a range of materials, just like plastics are a range of materials. Plastics cover a wide spectrum, and so does graphene. And so the principal pushback point from venture capitalists was, what is the killer app for graphene? And we were trying to explain that the type of graphene we were making was transformative as an additive material to other products. In other words, we don't make the product, we make it better. But they were thinking that graphene would be used for a sensor or a solar panel or something. And there are forms of graphene, such as graphene sheets, which are made in an entirely different way, and it's an entirely different product, that do that. But ours, you mix into other products in very small quantities, and you can reduce the amount of material that's used, but it then makes that product better. And it makes it either stronger, lighter, or more conductive, or some combination of those things. And so we were never really able to overcome that barrier with venture capitalists.
So I'm hearing also a lack of understanding on the product itself, but also maybe a little bit on the industry, not having a clear understanding of the applications of what you're developing. But I think the most important question here is you were not able to convince at that time of that particular application a venture capital firm, but you were incredibly successful of convincing the broader public. So let's explore for a second the crowdfunding campaign that you got, and how did you plan for it, and why do you think it was as successful from a messaging as well as from an execution standpoint?
So with venture capital firms, I would say that it was a trade-off, their sense of the valuation versus the killer app, right? And so that's why they were applying a very low valuation to the company. So if we were willing to accept a $5 million valuation, we could have gotten a lot of venture capitalists to invest. We thought the appropriate valuation was about 20 million. And so there was a delta there that we just could not overcome. But part of the reason for that, I think, is that the venture capitalists look at this in a certain way. I guess they look at it from the end of the process backwards. And that led them to ask what the killer app was and so forth. But with crowdfunding, what we do is we inspire people with what the possibilities are, right? Here's what we can do. And we explain it to them. And of course, we have to be very upfront about the risks that go along with that. But we want people to invest relatively small sums of money in the graphene revolution, how graphene can transform the planet. And that resonated well last year, and it's resonated even better this year, because last year, graphene was relatively unknown. It turned out that about one product per week was introduced using some suboptimal quality, low quality graphene material. One product per week on average was introduced. This year, it's about one product per day. And so the graphene revolution is unfolding in front of our eyes. So as investors look and do their research on graphene, and as they read what some of the analysts are now saying, they think, here's an opportunity to get involved in a certain segment of the market for high quality graphene. And they, as an average person, can invest a minimum of $250 or $1,000 or whatever their comfort level is that they think that they can risk. And that's the unique value proposition that we really are putting forward in our net capital campaign.
So let me put myself in the shoes of a founder who is thinking of doing a Reg CF campaign. He's not sure if this is necessarily the right path for them or not, but he's considering that as an opportunity, and at some point says, okay, I'm committed to doing this. How do you go about the next step, choosing the right platform, choosing the right language, choosing the right marketing strategy? Because compared to the traditional raising under, let's say, a 506c, when you're not allowed to do any form of general solicitation, you have to wear a very different hat. You're not pitching people one-on-one anymore. You're thinking about this from a marketing strategy perspective to some extent. So what advice would you have for that early process?
That's a great observation, Vlad, and you really put your finger right on it. When you're doing a Reg CF, you're really in the direct marketing business. And you have to clearly communicate the value proposition and the possibilities to potential investors in a very simple way. And we're talking aspirational. We're not talking about deeply scientific, and we're not really talking about what barriers there will be in the future. We're talking about today, looking forward like any founder would. What excites you as a founder has to excite the crowdfund group, the average person out there. And then you have to market it to them. And so we were lucky. We found an agency in Santa Monica, California called Digital Niche Agency. And they helped educate us because in our first crowdfunding round, we knew nothing. So we relied upon them as a trusted advisor to help us to shape the message. And so we really owe a great deal of our success to DNA because they helped us do it. Then how do you choose the crowdfunding platform? I think that's a vital question. Many people mistakenly choose a platform based upon how many other people are on it or how many investors there are, because it ranges from probably crowdfunding platforms with a couple of thousand people to some like WeFunder who have 1.5 million people. But that's not how it turns out crowdfunding works, because if you have a deep technology like we do, then Net Capital was an obvious choice for us because deep tech companies gravitate to that particular portal. And there are actually crowdfunding portals that if you want to do a movie, you can go on that one. And the base of investors on that are looking for art projects and particularly movies. And so these platforms, I think over time are going to really become specialized in certain things. If you have a product that you want to sell, then Kickstarter was the right one for you, right? Because it was all about promoting products and everything was set up about that. So the first thing to do is really do your research on that. Don't get carried away by how many users there are on the platform. Those users are really important, make no mistake, but they have to be interested in what you're doing. So if I went on Kickstarter, which had projects and products rather, and I had a deep tech offering, I'm going to be miserably unsuccessful, just absolutely unsuccessful. And if you have some other kind of technology altogether and you go on WeFunder and people there aren't really interested in that, that's not why they gravitate to WeFunder, then you will be unsuccessful. So that's the first thing. And then the second point I would say is that there is a trade-off between how much capital you can bring at the beginning of your campaign so that you look like you're real and have momentum, and how much you build up over time. We made the conscious decision to come in with a credible amount of money from investors that we had lined up ahead of time. I think in the first crowdfunding campaign, we got $150,000 in the first 2 weeks or something like that. And then we had a slow growth that kept going up, like a nice steep curve. That's the way our strategy works. Many people try to preload as many investors as they can, and then they flatline. And that sends the wrong signal to investors that you're going nowhere. Crowdfunding is based upon momentum.
So I hear about the platform and the relevance to the type of users that are there, and hopefully that creates some momentum with them because they get excited about these types of companies. But outside of the capital that you're getting from those individuals, what are considerations you have in mind about the type of benefits that you may get from doing a Reg CF rather than a traditional round?
Perfect question. And that's one of the reasons why I like crowdfunding so much. We put in $0 into sales and marketing of our graphene technology because through crowdfunding, companies hear about us. And we actually have no sales force, no marketing force, but yet we have companies coming to us. It's not much of an exaggeration to say almost every day, asking for samples, asking about our technology, because through the crowdfunding, which has spread the word, they hear about us. And so one of the things that happens is first, it builds up credibility. Because if I go chasing a company, asking them to please consider my graphene, I don't have a lot of credibility. But if the company hears about us and maybe from a few sources, looks up what we're doing, does their research, and then comes to us, then we have a better starting point in the discussion. And so that's one thing that crowdfunding does, which is invaluable, in my opinion.
So some people may have the pushback of, I hear you, Brad. Crowdfunding is great because of the amount of capital that you can raise, as well as the reach, quite frankly, the extensive reach that you may get as a result of some of this campaign. However, I'm not sure what my next step is. So how are you thinking about a post-Reg CF fundraising strategy, specifically around your next round and your future requirements of capital that may or may not be or could be fulfilled by another Reg CF campaign?
We have one great advantage, and that is we have a small but very, very seasoned management team. We've all done this for a long time. We all have a lot of success and experiences. So we know what our cash flow is, and we know how to forward plan for our cash needs. So after this Reg CF campaign, we are going to kick off another Reg D campaign where we'll seek to raise between $2 and $6 million at a higher valuation. And so that should get us to the point of being cash flow positive. But, for the average person, I think for the average founder, I think they have to take it more of an iterative process. Raise what you need through the crowdfunding campaign to give you a runway of X months. See how what milestones you can achieve, how much progress you can make, and then see if you can raise your valuation, even if it's only slightly, in the next round, when you might do another crowdfunding round or do a private placement, or even go to angels at that point.
And I'm glad you bring up the point of angels, because I wanted to ask you, you've definitely had a number of experiences with angel investors. You were able to attract several angel syndicates on your cap table in relation or in addition to your Reg CF raising. So I'm curious now, looking back at your cap table, quite frankly, obviously you do have a corporate venture capital arm from Panasonic, you do have individuals from the Reg CF, and you have angels for angel syndicates. How have you seen the different type of value that some of these individuals can provide to you? Did you have any form of direct contact with individuals from the Reg CF, and were angels really carrying their weight and providing the value add that you were expecting of them? How are you seeing value add from your cap table perspective?
Sure. So from the first crowdfunding from crowdfunding, we really don't expect to get any value other than cash, because the people who are investing are not necessarily expert in this field, or nor are they signing up with their very small investments, relatively speaking. It's a big size for them, but from the perspective of our overall cap table, each investment is small. We had 1,078 individual investors in the first crowdfunding round, which hit our cap table as one line item, as a SPV. And so we don't expect that. The angels really fell into two groups, the carry, but not really interested in participating. On the other hand, the Harvard Business School alumni angels have been fabulous. They are actively engaged, constantly asking questions. I really enjoy having conference calls with them, because they've all had C-level experience for the most part. And it's really going through an hour-long interrogation, but it makes me better, because I don't have the answers to all of those questions, but I know that there are things now that I should be thinking about, because they've opened my mind up. Being an entrepreneur is to be really razor focused. And part of what our friends at HBSAA do is they bring in a breadth of perspective and get me thinking about alternatives and thinking about things differently and opening up possibilities and suggesting things that we haven't. And so I've really enjoyed working with the angels. That's not in any way to diminish the crowdfunding investors, because they've been loyal to us and they're really great. But the HBSAA group of angels has been much more beneficial. And of course, they've invested each significantly more money than crowdfunding investors. Our average crowdfunding investor in the current round is at 2,500, and the angels are probably around 25,000. Some much more than that.
So a different level of skin in the game, a different level of expertise and ability to help as a
Absolutely.
result of that.
And much appreciated from both groups.
Absolutely. In your work with the angel investors, one of the things that you mentioned was this pushback and helping you get better because you don't have all the answers. And that reminded me a little bit of the due diligence process, right? Crafting your story and answers towards questions the investors care about, while also reflecting back around your potential as a company and your strategy moving forward. I'm wondering how much of that work really had to be done from a Reg CF perspective, because I think a lot of founders are worried coming into an angel round or a pre-seed round with an institutional investor of the amount of questions that they may be asked from those investors. Whereas the Reg CF doesn't necessarily follow the same level of due diligence process per se, but you do have the Q&A with those individuals where you do have to come up with those answers. So if you could compare and contrast the due diligence processes for us, I think that would be amazingly insightful for our listeners.
Sure. There is due diligence that is done for Reg CF, and that's all filed on the first day of your registration with the SEC in your Form C. We don't have a data room. The SEC requires crowdfunding to make all of the information available publicly to everyone at the same time. And The purpose of filing the Form C is to get that on the SEC website so that all of the crowdfunding investors or potential investors have access to the same information at the same time. That's really different from Reg D, when people can ask individual questions, and it's up to you as the founder, of course, but if you want their money and their investment, you have to provide the information that they ask. So individuals are asking different questions in Reg D. Everyone should have the access in Reg CF. And so then there are two types of questions that can get asked. One are comments, where they make observations and ask you to explain that. And the other are very specific questions that they post asking for a specific answer. And from the SEC perspective, that public forum that's available to anyone gives everyone the same access at the same time to those questions. There are a lot more questions asked by the crowdfunding than by Reg D. The ones by Reg D tend to be more data-driven. What is the average investment in your last angel round? How did you justify your market cap? Why did you have two classes of shares? Do you have preferred shares? Very relevant questions from an investor's point of view. The questions from crowdfunding are probably more market-oriented. How do you compare to this other company? Do you own your own patents? A different type of question, but they're more numerous in the crowdfunding. It takes quite a lot of time to respond to the questions from crowdfunding. And you also individually get calls and emails from investors all the time, and you have to try to steer them to the crowdfunding platform in order to be compliant with the SEC rules. So there's a lot more hands-on with crowdfunding than there is with Reg D.
So who in your team was managing all that process? Was it yourself?
Well, so we have our team is structured into functional areas. Erica handles finance, Phil handles markets and the science, and then I handle everything else. And we have a shareholder engagement manager who really tries to keep people informed and up to speed. So it's all based on function, who responds to which question.
And what would you have told yourself before you started a RegCF journey to hopefully have a either faster RegCF campaign or a more relaxing one from the perspective of the stress and the amount of effort that you had to do on a day-to-day basis to keep it going?
Great question. In the first campaign, I really would have had my ducks in a row before I started the campaign. I didn't realize what the dynamic of the campaign would be. You have to have a campaign video. You have to have messaging that goes out. People would appreciate and expect updates from me, even if it's a selfie video or holding a webinar. And there's a lot of material that I would have prepared in advance. This time we did that and it was smoother. But this time we've had macroeconomic chaos in the country, right, and in the world. And that got us off to a slower start. And so the first bit of the campaign went very, very slowly. And I don't think it had anything to do with us. I think it had to do with people worried about recession, inflation, uncertainty, the political divide. For some reason now we've really emerged. A lot of campaigns are still struggling from that.
I'm glad you brought up the macroeconomic context, but that was actually my next question for you, which is how have you felt the impact? Because I think a lot of people, a lot of the guests on this podcast talked about obviously the pullback in venture capital funding, the struggles of GPs raising from LPs and not having the capital available on hand to make new investments, a lot of funds deciding to prioritize their portfolio companies, not make new investments outside of that. And then there's, of course, the other funds who are going business as usual, but fewer than they were, let's say, last year. Outside of what you mentioned so far, what were some of the other aspects that you have some concrete experience or evidence around the impact of the macroeconomic context on RegCF and your success in this second campaign?
That is also a really great question. There's one company called Kingscrowd which does analytics on the crowdfunding industry, and they follow the trends and they do the data crunching and everything else. You really have to look at what they're doing and read what they're writing before you get involved in a crowdfunding campaign, because you'll learn a lot from them. They just put out a study or a report saying that the period of January to July is down 70% in crowdfunding, the amount invested through crowdfunding over the same period last year. So there's your evidence on the macroeconomic impact on crowdfunding. And so the way to mitigate that, in my opinion, is to go to crowdfunding if you really think you have a great value proposition. If you don't, if you think you have an ordinary one, probably this is a terrible time to go into crowdfunding, right? When the whole market was going up, that might have been a very good time to go to crowdfunding. But the market is going down, the overall market. That doesn't mean that you can't stand out. It just means that you have to be very clear with the investment community about what your vision is, how you're going to execute that, and how they can make money from backing you at this particular point. And I think that messaging is the most important thing for crowdfunding.
I really appreciate you sharing the advice on what would make it a successful campaign, but also alluding to a little bit on what would not make a successful campaign, which is really my last question before we jump into the rapid fire. I'm a founder and I should not raise RegCF funding. Why is that the case? What would make me a founder who should absolutely not touch RegCF funding as an option?
Well, if you need more than $5 million, you shouldn't do Reg CF, because that's your limit in any 12-month period is 5 million. So if you think you can go to Reg CF, the crowdfunding, and then raise money afterwards, but you don't have enough runway, I would not go to crowdfunding, because a lot of companies have tried that and a lot of companies have failed because they can't raise the money after the Reg CF. If you have a very high sense of what your valuation should be, you may not want to do Reg CF. Our first campaign was at $20 million. Our current one is at $28 million valuation. That's on the high end of what I would say crowdfunding will support. I've seen companies on there with $500 million valuation. And, frankly, I'm not sure it was worth $10 million, okay? But the founder was, and they failed because people are not stupid. And if the founder gets caught up in how much potential there is for their business and they don't understand that it's the capital from the people you're asking to invest that make it have that potential, then there's a disconnect. And I would also say that if the founder is not really willing to work hard for the money, they shouldn't do crowdfunding. It's constant work. Every day you're out there thinking of different ways to message what you have. You're listening to what people are saying on those message boards. You have to take it to heart. You have to say, I think they're right, so let me address that. Or I think they're wrong. Let me try to explain to them why I think they're wrong. But they're your shareholders, and it doesn't matter if they've invested 250 or 100,000. Each of them has a right to ask those questions and give you their comment. And if you don't take that seriously, it's sending a bad message to everyone else. So you have to be committed to your shareholders. And then finally, I would say that you really have to show progress. People want to see you set out and articulate and achieve milestones, and to explain ahead of time what your plan is, and then when you hit it, why you hit it or why you didn't. And that's how you get people to invest again, because your best investor in crowdfunding is someone who has already invested in you, because they've already been persuaded. Now they want to see results. So it's very typical that someone might invest X the first time and 3X the second time and 5X the third time. I mean, we see that all the time. And that's because they are giving you a vote of confidence. The first investment is truly risk capital that they can afford to lose and walk away from. But then they want to invest a little bit more because they're sharing the vision and they're feeling more comfortable as you hit those milestones.
This has been absolutely amazing, Brad. Would love to take it on the rapid fire because I think so far we unpacked so much about your journey, Avadain, as well as the Reg CF and how to incorporate in your fundraising strategy. We'd love to spend the last minutes of the episode to learn more about yourself. And our very first rapid fire question is always, what was one thing that people don't know about Brad that they should know about him?
Well, I live on a farm and it's really beautiful. And I have two wonderful children, twin girls, who are in the 9th grade. And my life outside of Avadain is about my family. And that's the most important thing in the world to me.
Fantastic. Thanks. Appreciate you sharing that. And I'm really excited for the next two. Our second one is, what is one person that you've consistently looked up to over the course of your life or career?
Well, I think there are several, but my ex-boss, Elliot Richardson, was the most influential. He was my boss at the law firm, and he had been the U.S. Attorney General who resigned rather than fire the special prosecutor during Watergate. But what most people don't know is he held more cabinet positions than any other person in history. He testified before Congress many more times than any other person in history. He really embodied very progressive qualities, but he did it as a Republican in a centrist way. And because of that, he was respected by both Democrats and Republicans and was able always to work with both sides. And I've really admired that because whether it's in politics, which I'm not involved in, or whether it's business, which I am involved in, that ability to be strongly principled and yet be able to work with everyone, I think, gave him unbelievable strength and credibility.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that you probably embody every single day as the CEO of the organization and having to manage all the stakeholders in a similar fashion.
Well, we try as best we can.
Right. And I'm super curious for the last one because this is a question that became a tradition at our company and previous companies as well. And we wanted to bring this into the podcast, which is end every team meeting with a point of gratitude. So as we come to the end of this podcast episode and you reflect back on your success in business, as well as in family and life in general, would be one person, and unfortunately you only have to pick one, that you would like to say thank you for their contributions towards Brad of today?
Oh, my wife, for sure. I mean, she's the one that held everything together. I used to travel before COVID constantly. I was traveling everywhere. She had to really keep the family together. She does everything that allows me to be doing what I'm doing. And so without her, I couldn't possibly do this. So if there's anyone that I have that degree of gratitude for, it's clearly my wife.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And my gratitude goes to you today for taking time of your busy schedule and having this amazing and open answers to my questions and sharing really your story and some of the advice received and given over this period towards our listeners, helping them get better at fundraising, start more companies, and get funded faster by the right individuals for the right companies so we can together prosper. So thank you so much, Brad, for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks, Vlad. And I really enjoyed it very much. I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
What a great conversation. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like and subscribe to our podcast and be on the lookout for a new episode in 2 weeks as we interview another amazing startup founder and debrief their successful fundraising story. This podcast was made possible by Flowlie. If you're currently fundraising or planning to do so in the near future, create a free account today on Flowlie at flowlie.com. That's flowlie.com. And get access to an investor database curated just for you and powerful deck sharing capabilities with advanced access and engagement tracking. Are you ready to take your fundraising journey to the next level and join thousands of founders across the globe who use the platform every single day? Find the discount code in the show notes and sign up today. That's it for today's episode. See you next time.